Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, the concluding plenary session of the 24th Annual International Law and Religion Symposium at Brigham Young University. We've had a full few days, and quickly we've come to the end of our academic work together. As we begin this closing session, I want to once again thank all of you for coming from long distances and for the high level of preparation and the quality of the presentations that have been shared. As I noted at the beginning, we've been publishing special symposium editions of the BYU Law Review for the last 23 years. And we look forward to a symposium issue being issued in connection with this symposium as well. Unfortunately, the production schedule of law reviews is about a year-long process. So by the time those books will be in print, it will be a little bit down the road. But we understand the importance of memorializing the things we say into print. There's a lot of good that happens when we get together and speak with one another, but that good can quickly dissipate if we don't do the further hard work of writing it up and publishing it. And in that spirit, today we would like to celebrate together some publications of delegates who are here at the symposium. In your invitation letter, we asked you to share with us your recent publications from this year, and we've heard from a few of you, but if you're not included, we apologize for not being aware of all of the good work that has been done by each of you in the past year. I'd like to first highlight a book called Religious Intolerance in Brazil, Report and Account. And one of the primary authors of that book is here with us at this symposium, Ivanor dos Santos. Will you stand up and let us congratulate you with a round of applause? This is a very significant book because it addresses and articulates in detail situations arising religious intolerance in a country that's known for religious tolerance. And so it's a good example that we don't have to be dealing with situations of crisis to be aware that there are problems and room for improvement. One of my favorite things about this book is it's written and published in both English and Portuguese. If you look at the book from this side and open it, you will find the English version. And if you turn the book over to what you would imagine is the back cover, you get the Brazilian version. And if you open the book and thumb forward, you will get the same book, but with the Brazilian translation. It's a lovely way of making sure that a wide audience has access to the book. So congratulations, Professor Dos Santos. Next, this is a book that is so new that if you go on Amazon and order it today, it's not available yet, but it will be in about 2 weeks. This is a book called State and Religion, Reassessing a Mutual Relationship by Sophie van Bietzeveld. Sophie, as you know, is a professor of law at Radboud University and also a senator from the Netherlands. And what I love about her book is it deals in a deeply theoretical way, but in also a deeply practical way with actual issues. And one thing that it's quite easy for us to do as academics is pontificate and provide sweeping solutions to general problems. One of the great virtues of Professor van Bietzeveld's book is that it gives very careful and contextualized approaches to specific real-world challenges. And it's a model of responsible scholarship that is engaged with practical decision making. And I have to think, Sophie, that your experience as a senator has informed and influenced the care with which you think and address these issues. Let me ask you to stand and let us thank Sophie for this great accomplishment. The next book on our list is by Hans Martin ten Nepal, who is also here. I'm a little bit worried that the only productive people seem to be Dutch. We actually have another book that I don't have with me from our friend Jeroen Temperman, another Dutch law professor that is just on the cusp of publication. But Hans Martin ten Nepal's book is Constitutionalism, Democracy, and Religious Freedom to Be Fully Human. For those of us who were here for Professor Nepal's address earlier today, you're eager to read this book because he gave us a preview of a very humane and sensitive defense of religious freedom in a pluralistic world, and what it means to create room for religion in both public life and private life, and in response to a growing chorus of critics of the idea of religious freedom and critics of the suggestion that religious freedom is an important value that needs to be protected. This book, I think, will have significance and influence that reaches far beyond the Netherlands and far beyond Europe. And Professor ten Nepal, congratulations. Please stand and let us recognize you for this wonderful accomplishment. The next book I want to recognize is also so new that it isn't even out in pre-publication copies. This is a major new book called The Constitution of Freedom, An Introduction to Legal Constitutionalism by Andras Shayo and his protege, Renata Wietz, who is also a professor at Central European University. This is published by Oxford University Press and is a second edition. Is that right, Andras? Third edition? Yeah, it's actually, what I was about to say is I've seen some of the galleys on this, and this book is evidence that the second edition is sometimes a lot more work than even the first edition because it's such a major revision, and the level and depth of thinking that was already extraordinary is even more remarkable in this version. So, Andras, I don't want to embarrass you, but let me ask you to stand, and let me ask our group to join me in thanking you for this contribution. There are two other books that I would like to highlight, one which you received as a gift in your materials when you arrived. This is a book called A World of Faith, and it's a picture book for children. And it was prepared in connection with the Olympics, when the Olympics were held here in Salt Lake City in 2002. So already 15 years ago. It's surprising, the passage of time. But we have a special debt of gratitude to one of our International Advisory Council members, Jennifer Darger. Jennifer, could you stand? Where's Jennifer? Here's Jennifer. Let me ask you to join me in a round of applause for Jennifer. Jennifer is responsible for the paintings that are all of the illustrations from this book being on display, and she has purchased those and lent them to the center. And so we have those that we will display prominently at our workshops and our conferences as a reminder of the world of faith in which we live. And one of the things that I appreciate about this book, beyond the charming illustrations and the fair and balanced text, is its focus on children. Because after all of us are just passing through. And we have a responsibility to the generations that succeed us, that the principles of tolerance, of understanding, of respect, that we are here to discuss with each other gets shared with our children, grandchildren. How many here have great-grandchildren? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Our great-grandchildren as well. And my hope is that each of us will take this home and share it with someone, a child who can benefit from an introduction in a way that's very understandable and approachable for them of the deeply important and true principles that we've been discussing here in this symposium. So once again, let me just ask you to join me in thanking Jennifer for the gift of this book. The book is from her to each of us. And finally, for those of you who were at the concurrent session earlier today, there's a new book edited by Vanya Savich and Paul Babby called Religion, Law, and Love. And we are pleased and honored to be able to officially launch this book here today at this symposium. It was published just 2 weeks ago. And it's such a lovely book and such an interesting and broad topic that we decided that we wanted each of you to have a copy. So I hope you received one on your way in. If not, please pick one up on your way out. But we have a copy for each delegate, each member of the IAC. And the exciting thing about this is very few of us who are scholars can imagine having our book in the hands of people from 50 countries, much less a mere 2 weeks after the publication of our book. But when you take these books home and put them on your shelf, we will have done something quite remarkable, which is taken an academic book on law and religion and put it into the hands of thought leaders, public intellectuals, religious leaders, academic leaders, political leaders from 50 countries around the world. And we're very proud of that. So I am going to officially launch this book by unwrapping the copy I have here in my hands. And as I do this, I'd like to ask Vanya Savich, Vanya, to stand. And please join me in thanking him. Paul Babby had to return home. Paul Babby, the other editor, has already come and gone. He arrived this morning, made his presentation, and is off on a flight to Canada already. Ladies and gentlemen, Law, Religion, and Love, Seeking Ecumenical Justice for the Other. The cover of this book deserves an explanation for those of you who are not here for Vanya's presentation. The cover photo is a headstone in a cemetery. And it was a cemetery in the Netherlands where Protestants and Catholics were separated by a wall in the section of the cemetery where they could be buried. And what you see in this photograph is two tombstones with a sculpted hand reaching out over the wall, grasped together. It was the children of a mixed marriage couple, one parent being Protestant and one parent being Catholic, that bought plots next to each other on the opposite side of this wall and then built a bridge, which is what we hope that the concept of love can do for us as well. So Vanya, Paul, thank you very much and congratulations. All right. For the balance of our closing session today, I'd like to share a few closing thoughts about human rights. And then Professor Durham, I'll turn the floor to him for some expressions of gratitude and also invitations to a few delegates speaking on behalf of all of us to express their thoughts and reflections on the symposium. And then after those presentations, we'll ask Professor Durham to close our conference with his final closing thoughts as well. Could I get the PowerPoint turned on? Oh, it is on. Wow, that was magic. Today, I would like to address a single, simple question, and that is whether human rights are a Western concept. Perhaps you have heard this critique of human rights. I heard it recently in Indonesia, where I was teaching, and one of my students raised his hand and asked in an accusatory way, "Aren't human rights just a Western concept used by powerful nations to beat up on less powerful nations?" Have you heard variations of this type of criticism? Well, I asked him, are you concerned about the treatment of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar? He said, of course, it's outrageous. And I said, well, you're from Indonesia, a Muslim majority country, the fourth largest country in the world with 260 million people. And you are criticizing a small Buddhist nation with less than 1/5 the population of Indonesia. Is that illegitimate? It's not often where you have a teaching moment where you feel like you've actually communicated something in a way that the student is stopping to think. It is true that with the human rights revolution, beginning with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, there was a transformation in international law. Prior to that time, individual human beings were for the most part not a subject of international law. International law involved relations between states. With the human rights revolution came this change. From that moment forward, it was no longer possible for any state in this world to say to anyone else, the way we treat our people is not your business. Human rights makes the treatment of all people in all places all of our business. Yet there is this criticism that human rights are primarily a Western concept. I think there are several causes for this. One is the use of human rights to engage in selective criticism. Beginning with President Jimmy Carter, the U.S. has, to one extent or another, included human rights as a foreign policy value. And they have not always done this in a way that is consistent or principled. There is often criticism of states that are unfriendly, and less criticism of states that are friendly to the strategic, national, or economic interests of the United States. A second reason is that new and controversial rights often claim the mantle of human rights, making human rights more controversial than they would otherwise be. In the United States, for example, the most powerful advocacy group for gay marriage calls itself the Human Rights Campaign. I don't think this is an accident. I think it is a deliberate strategy to capture the very powerful resources of human rights for an important interest, but one that is not directly addressed in the international human rights instruments. And the third reason, I think, is that there are powerful and vocal opponents of human rights. Academic voices sometimes criticize human rights as being too vague, or as being broad or under-enforced. It is interesting to note that many of these critics do it from positions of comfort in places where their human rights are well protected. I have never heard anyone in a refugee camp, in a prison, or people belonging to a persecuted minority arguing that human rights are not universal, that they are simply a Western concept. Consider the other powerful opponents of human rights, and perhaps in one's opponents one can find comfort. They include authoritarian regimes, such as Russia and Singapore, undemocratic and illiberal regimes, such as China, tyrannical, despotic, dictatorial, and totalitarian regimes. You can name them yourselves. Communist regimes such as China, with concern for party control and monopoly power, reactionary regimes, religious theocracies, or countries in the grip of religious nationalism. Here again, I think of Russia, of certain Gulf states, of India and Nepal. There are also atheistic fundamentalist regimes, such as Albania during the Soviet era, or the USSR during that era, or China during the Cultural Revolution. If these are the enemies of human rights, the authoritarians, the illiberal, undemocratic states, the tyrants, the despots, the dictators, the totalitarians, the reactionaries, the theocracies, and the atheistic fundamentalists, then count me as a friend. Think about the history of the adoption of human rights. Human rights arose from the crucible of the end of World War II. This was a time when over 60 million people had been killed, in addition to the 16 million that had been killed during World War I. The UN Charter was designed to create the prospect for peace and security. Human rights definitely took a back seat. They are barely mentioned in the Charter of the United Nations. So, who are the advocates for human rights? Were they the great powers that emerged victorious from World War II? Was it the Soviet Union? No. With their communist collective ideology, they were not interested in human rights. Was it the United Kingdom, Great Britain, England? No. They were interested in holding on to what they could to their colonial empire that was slipping through their fingers. Was it the United States? Again, no. The U.S. was in the grip of racial segregation, and tremendous racial hostility still existed throughout the U.S., and especially in the southern part of the United States. The rallying cry for human rights came from those who would not let the Allied powers forget that it was freedom, justice, democracy, and human rights for which they had been enlisted to fight in World War II. Who were the advocates of human rights? They were small countries, including countries that were not yet part of the United Nations. There were only, I believe, 56 countries in the UN at the time of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And yet, many other countries under colonial oppression were among the leading advocates for human rights. You know this because many of you come from those countries. It also included NGOs, including religious communities. The Seventh-day Adventists, for example, had already been advocating for half a century for religious freedom. And it arose from the press. As awareness of the atrocities of the Nazi concentration camps and the Japanese imperial prison camps came to light, the world collectively recoiled and did not want to return to that world. The drafting process was inclusive and broad. It began with a UNESCO survey of all existing rights instruments from around the world and the solicitation of views from statesmen, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens from around the world. There were 18 countries on the drafting committee. I won't go through all of them here and now, but they came from north and south, east and west, developed and less developed. Countries aligned with NATO as well as the Warsaw Pact. Countries with Christian majorities, Muslim majorities, secular states, Hindu majority countries. All of them were represented in the drafting of the UDHR. The key drafters included Eleanor Roosevelt from the United States, P.C. Chang from China, Charles Malik from Lebanon, and John Humphrey from Canada. What about the UDHR itself? The preamble says in its opening words, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Is that a Western idea? The UDHR was ratified or adopted by Universal Declaration of the United Nations on the cold night of December 10th, 1948 in Paris. Actually, it was the morning of the 11th by the time all the speeches by the politicians were finished. And it was adopted unanimously, 48-0. Yes, the critic says, but weren't there 8 abstentions? Yes. Who were they and why did they abstain? South Africa abstained because it wanted to defend apartheid. Saudi Arabia abstained because it wanted to maintain a religious monopoly and did not want to acknowledge the right to change religion and did not want to acknowledge that women and men had equal rights with respect to marriage. And 6 communist countries abstained. Why? Because the UDHR asserted the right of individuals to leave their countries, to emigrate, to not be prisoners in their own land. And for this reason, there were abstentions. It is interesting that these states had the self-respect not to vote no, but rather held their heads low. Furthermore, the rights articulated in the UDHR have been enshrined in treaties. There are 9 core human rights treaties. For any country that has signed and ratified a treaty, these have become legally binding obligations with respect to the covenants and promises that they have made in those treaties. For these countries to say that this is just a Western concept is to commit fraud because they have solemnly covenanted to protect these rights. When people ask me if these rights are simply Western concepts, I like to go to the text of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I start with Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Do any of us disagree with this? Article 2 addresses non-discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, language, and religion. Article 3, the protection of life, liberty, and security. Article 4 prohibits slavery and servitude. Article 5 prohibits torture and cruel or degrading treatment. Article 6 recognizes human beings as persons before the law. Article 7 ensures equal protection of the law. Which of these rights do you not value? We as human beings value each of these rights. We want them for ourselves. It is insulting to the rest of the world to say these are exclusively Western values. These are human values. What about Article 18? Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. What human being does not want this right? I have yet to find one. What about the right to change? Well, each of us has changed our beliefs today. If not, we're wasting our time listening to each other, because that is what we do when we listen and learn. We change, perhaps incrementally, perhaps significantly, but we change. If we don't believe in the right to change, then we should stop speaking, because it makes no sense for us to try to persuade anyone else of anything if we don't believe in the right to change what we believe. There are various metaphors that are used to describe freedom of religion. These include the undergird, the foundation, the grandparent, the precondition, the animating force of human rights. I like the metaphor of the taproot. Simon McCrossan, speaking here at this symposium last year, spoke of what he described as the cut flower culture of human rights, where we as a society seek to enjoy the beautiful flowers of human rights while denying or even severing them from their roots. What is that taproot? I believe it is religious freedom, freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. Think about the other freedoms we hold dear. What would they be like if we stripped from them religious freedom? Freedom of conscience, which began with religious conscientious objection by groups such as Quakers and Seventh-day Adventists to laws of general applicability involving military service. Freedom of speech. This right emerged with religious dissenters asserting their right to disagree with established state-sponsored churches. Freedom of the press. This right emerged over the struggle to print the Bible. Freedom of association emerged in large measure over the struggle of religious minority groups to gather together in community to worship. Rights of non-discrimination. This is largely a right not to be discriminated against on the basis of religion, thought, conscience, and belief. What would these rights look like without a commitment to religious freedom? Also significant are the mechanisms for implementing human rights. We sometimes think of these as primarily international and top-down. Of course, we do have important declarations like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and subsequent international treaties, such as the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. But most enforcement of human rights takes place elsewhere, in regional treaties such as the European Convention on Human Rights, and through powerful and influential courts like the European Court of Human Rights, through national constitutions, statutes, and regulations which also implement human rights. Nearly every constitution in the world has been written and adopted since the UDHR, and nearly every one of those constitutions includes human rights guarantees based on the UDHR, but they're national law, national constitutional law, the supreme law of the land. There are other important institutions for implementing human rights, including education, media, civil society, and religious groups. I've come to believe that the most important and influential group to enforce human rights will be the family. Mothers and fathers, maybe mainly mothers, teaching their children. So, let me conclude with 7 recommendations, and I'll move quickly. First, with respect to human rights, keep it simple. Focused on the text of the most foundational basic instruments. When I teach human rights, I focus almost exclusively on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its simple, elegant, and powerful declarations. Second, focus on the most important aspects of these rights. For example, the prohibition on genocide, discrimination, and persecution. With each right, each human right, there is a core of conscience, for example, and then there is a periphery. For example, the right to have your religious holiday respected. For the most part, most of the time, we should focus on the core. Third, avoid the politicization of human rights to the extent possible. It is important for human rights to be understood and to be viewed broadly as universal and not as idiosyncratic, as Western, or as local. And for us to do this, I think we need to be principled and not political in our advocacy of human rights. Fourth, focus on rights as aspirations rather than weapons. Again, as we turn to the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, these are held out as a common standard of achievement for all people, to be implemented both through national and international mechanisms incrementally. And I think human rights are most powerful when they are positive ideals to which we should all aspire than when they are bludgeons with which we try to beat each other up. It's important to emphasize when speaking of freedom of religion that it includes the right not to believe as well as the right to believe. This is related to the issue of politicization. Freedom of religion and belief is politicized when it is used to protect religious belief, but not to protect non-religious belief. There are, I think it's fair to say, many non-religious believers who are skeptical or hostile to the idea of freedom of religion because it feels exclusive. And so I think we need to be quite careful, especially those of us who are religious believers, to continually remind ourselves and others that freedom of thought, conscience, and belief protects theistic, non-theistic, atheistic beliefs, as well as the right of the unconcerned, the right to not care very much, which applies to some people as well. No one in this room. 6, I think we can focus largely on law, non-legal mechanisms. When we think of human rights, I'm a lawyer, I like the law. It's easy to think in terms of legal solutions. But again, I believe it's going to largely be churches, schools, synagogues, mosques, the PTA, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the Campfire Girls. These are the places where human rights are going to be instilled and embraced. And this leads to the 7th and final point, which has to do with education. If you look at the preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it speaks of the implementation and realization of human rights, the emphasis is clearly on education. And so that gives us something to feel good about because we're educators here in an educational setting. But I do believe that the most important human rights institutions are schools, churches, and the home. Thank you very much. I'll now turn the microphone to Professor Durham.
Well, I have some business things as well as some other things that I've been asked to do. This may make up for the plenary where we didn't have an announcement after Cliff Wallace's, but I'd like to start. One of the things you have evaluation forms set in front of you. In many years I have talked about something I learned from, well, you'll perhaps remember one of the speeches at the end of Sunday conference. This was Henry B. Eyring, who is now a church leader, but in his earlier life he had a doctorate of business administration from Harvard and then taught at Stanford and did a number of other educational things. And one of the things I learned from him is that there is empirical evidence that if you don't write down some things you're going to do at the end of a conference, not much happens as a result. So one of the things I would like to encourage you to do is two things. There's 2 pages here, and you need to tear these apart. One is for us, and one is for you. So the first is just an evaluation form. I'm just going to take a minute because it's in English, and I realize we've got, I don't know how many other languages, 15? So let me just quickly read through this so those of you who are not English speakers will know what it says. We appreciate your candid feedback. You can put your name on or not as you prefer. It helps us to know where the feedback is coming from, but if you want to give us anonymous feedback, that's fine as well. But going down the chart, there's across the top, excellent, good, fair, poor, and then transportation, hotel, hosting, meals, Sundance, Humanitarian Center you will see tomorrow, so not much you can do about that right now. But interpretation, conference facilities, and the conference theme and content, just some general impressions there. Then item number 1, comments on any of the above or general impressions, and this can be written in English or your native language. As you've figured out, we have ways of interpreting things. Number 2, what comments do you have about the symposium theme, panels, sessions? 3, what activities were most meaningful to you? 4, what is the most important insight you gained from participation in the conference? 5, do you plan to take any specific actions as a result of what you have heard? Then the second one is the one I encourage you to take some time and think about things that you think that you should do. One of the amazing things to me about this conference over the years is learning the number of things that people have done when they go home. Now, so many of you are so busy and are doing things all the time that maybe I shouldn't be surprised. But it's been really significant to me to watch that. Now, on this form, one of the things you should do, this is very mundane, but you all got luggage tags. And so write down on this, put my luggage tags on my luggage. This will keep your luggage from getting lost tomorrow. So very important, very practical. They're colors, so that they're color coded. If you've lost them, which is what I would do, you can ask the staff and we will get the right color to you, but they're color coded, it's brilliantly organized, and anyway, so that's...
Can I say a word about that?
Yeah.
So the colors that you put on your luggage tomorrow morning when you leave the hotel will determine where your luggage goes. And for some of you, that's the airport. For some of you, it is a hotel in Salt Lake City. For some of you, it's someplace else. But our students will help you get it tagged and put in the right place, but you need to help make sure that happens.
So don't ever say that I have not a practical bone in my body. This is the only one. Second point, participant list. One of the great things about this conference is being able to keep in touch with people. There's general information, of course, about everyone in the conference program, but in a few days after the program, we will set up a password-protected site that will have actual contact information so that you can be in touch with other people if you would like to. Most people welcome that, but there are some people who are in sensitive positions or whatever for whom that could be a problem. So if you want not to have more full contact information disclosed, just send an email to Deborah Wright, whose email address is on item 1 on this other list. So with those profound initial remarks, let me turn to just expressing some words of thanks. There's so many people that contribute to and make this conference work, and I would like to be able to thank everyone. I'm sure I will miss some people, but let me at least try. First of all, I would really like to thank the students. There are too many to name, but I know particularly Jessica Farnsworth and Shalise Roop, who have managed the master schedule. If any of you have seen this, it's, you know, a work of art that goes minute by minute when everyone's getting picked up, and it gets amended on the fly when someone misses a flight. But this is just part of things that the transportation group, the people who are working with publications, it's a remarkable group, and so please join me in thanking our students. We also owe special thanks to our interpreters, headed up by Syed Osmani. You have not necessarily seen them, although many of you may have met them. They're tucked away in a distant part of the building, but this conference obviously wouldn't work. I think we translate about double the number of languages that are done at the United Nations. And this is a complex process, but again, join me in thanking them. They will hear this. Along the same lines, I want to thank all the people who have worked with media, with interpretation equipment, audiovisual equipment, headed by Vance Everett at our law school and Eamon Stevenson, many others at the law school, the dean, the law school staff, other faculty members, and Laurie Anderson at BYU Travel have been very helpful. So thanks to them. Yeah. We also owe a tremendous debt of gratitude, and debt is probably the literal word, to our International Advisory Council, chaired by David Christensen, and our hosting committee, headed by Linda Neron and Lynn Anderson, and so many others that you've had a chance to meet while you are here. They make this possible, and we're very grateful to each of them. I'll group some of the others together. We owe special thanks to Bill Atkin, who has been with us in some of the sessions, the Associate General Counsel for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and his legal team that represents the LDS Church around the world. I often, when we had a physician as university president, I tried to explain what we were doing by saying, you know, doctors have to have a hospital to learn how to do things. We need to be in touch with what's going on in the world, and this is one of the things that's been extraordinarily helpful to us. Also, I owe a special thanks to Judge Wallace. I've kept attendance on him, and he did miss one of the 24 conferences. This was because he was speaking at some judicial conference in the Pacific or something like that. But he's been a remarkable help. As you noticed, we had a session with judges today, and he's done work with many judges over many years. These sessions couldn't have been arranged without him, and we're thankful to him. So on our own staff, again, I'll miss some people. The part-time secretaries, our team of people who are ostensibly part-time workers. Don't turn me into the labor enforcers. No, we're actually pretty good, but Blythe Shoup, Sandy Stevenson, Charmin Blood, to Don Lou Thayer, our head of publications extraordinaire, our associate directors, Jane Wise and Gary Doxey, and particular mention to the longest-serving associate director, Elizabeth Clark, who has assumed overall responsibility for management of the conference this year, and our Center Coordinator, Deborah Wright. They deserve countless thanks. And of course, I also need to thank Brett. He talked about sort of being partners, and I'm just immensely grateful for him, for his talent, his capacity, his sharing the vision and the hope of what we are trying to do here, making, we hope, some small difference in various parts of the world. Thankful for his patience. He knows more than anyone else the things I haven't got done, and he's very patient. He's been an unflagging supporter, and he has tremendous talent, and he is much more than a partner. He's a brother. Thank you. Now, our greatest debt, of course, is owed to you. I have been in enough of your countries to know how long those flights are, and particularly if you miss a flight. And I know how busy you are, and what it means to us to have the opportunity to have you here, to be able to meet with you, to be able to establish personal contacts. One of the things I've learned over the years is the internet is really wonderful, but it works a whole lot better if you know the people at the other end. And so the remarkable generosity each of you have contributed to us and to this process by coming and joining us here. We're tremendously thankful, and we would like to applaud you as well. Now, what's going to happen now, we've asked a few people, and we could have chosen many, many others, but we wanted, one of the really difficult things about this event is there are so many split out sessions, and you would like to go to many more than you're able to go to if you're like me. But we would like to take a few minutes to have, and we've invited, let me count, 6 people from various parts of the world to just share with us a few minutes of impressions of things that they saw and that can help us pull together things at the end of this conference. So, let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We don't have quite enough seats up here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Do we have? If worse comes to worse, I'll.
Yeah, we have 7.
We've got. Okay, perfect. Okay, and we can do it. You can tell we planned ahead. So let me just read these in order. Daniel Serre, professor from Canada, the director of the School of Religious Studies at McGill University. Luigi Laconiti from Italy, a member of parliament in Italy. If they could come up and take their seats on the stand. Denise Posse-Lindberg, a senior judge from the 3rd Judicial District in Utah, but this does not fully disclose her Cuban origins and international background. Qua Kung Trong from Vietnam, Director, Department for General and International Affairs, in the Institute of Legislative Studies in the National Assembly of Vietnam. Then Mohammed Amin, United Kingdom Chairman, Conservative Muslim Forum. And finally, Juan Navarro Floria, Argentina, Professor of Law, I'm not going to do this, the Pontifical University of Argentina. So, Professor Serre.
Well, I'm brand new to the work of the center and to this unique international conference. some of my takeaways. I come away from this just appreciative of the work of the center. I think it provides a truly outstanding platform for ongoing interreligious, international, intercultural, interdisciplinary exchanges on religious freedom and the role of religion and law in secular societies. I think creating this unique platform must have involved very deep investment by not only key academic actors and religious institutions, but an array of benefactors. So I can only be thankful for all of that and seeing the fruit it's bearing. I'm sure it's also meant a very deep level of dedication and sacrifice on the part of those who've been leading this initiative over all of these years. In the breakout session, I was following the trajectory on pluralism. Legal and religious traditions are struggling with the kind of ever deepening forms of pluralism within modern societies. My colleague Victor Fraticelli referred to this as the challenge of normative pluralism, challenge and opportunity, I suppose. Speakers in the sessions reflected an array of responses to this deep pluralism. Some have underscored dangers and threats, particularly to religious freedom. Others have underscored the challenges and opportunities that these developments offer. I think whether from a pessimistic or optimistic perspective, I think there's a common conclusion that there's no meaningful way to reverse the tide. What I picked up, and I'm not, as I said, I'm relatively new to the work here, but what I picked up from the discussions that the center's response to this challenging situation is, okay, let's get to work, pull up our sleeves and get to work. And I think that's what I've been seeing from looking at the array of activities and publications that have been coming out of the work of the center. I think the center has also been willing to take some bold risks in constructive engagement and spearheading initiatives on how faith-based institutions can grapple with the dilemmas generated by the ever-growing pluralism of rights claims. I walk away from this confident that this work will be drawing an ever-growing critical mass of scholars, religious actors into this conversation. It certainly captured my attention. I want to thank the directors for all their work on this, for Cole, Elizabeth. Special thanks to our chaperone, the Canadian chaperone, Sandra Palin, who has kind of walked the walk with us from Canada to here and continues to engage us not only into helping us getting through our travels, but also ongoing conversation about the themes in the conference. And I just, on behalf of myself and maybe the delegates, a special thanks to the students. The students have just been remarkable. It's not just in terms of the work they've been doing, but just their cordiality. It's just been a wonderful having the opportunity to meet, talk, and walk the walk a little bit with BYU students. So, thank you.
Sì, grazie. Scusate perché non io devo dire che I do not speak English. I came here with a lot of curiosity. This is my first time here with you at this important event. I was really impressed. My assistant, Dr. De Lucchese, was talking about this experience as one of the best experiences of her professional career. I shared that feeling. I am struck by your humanity, by the richness of your feelings. And this is not something that usually happens in such symposia. I believe this is due to the history of suffering that your church had to go through. I am also from a church who had a lot of suffering, the Valdesian church. I thank you for your humanity and kindness. I will leave here with a greater competence, the competence that you shared with us and allowed me to enjoy. In Italy, we're facing a very interesting situation. You were with us a few days ago at a meeting in Italy, at a conference in Italy. We are, of course, Italy is part of the Western countries where rights and principles are well established and have been so for many years. Notwithstanding this, we have not yet defined the concept of religious freedom. And as a member of parliament, I've had to fight in parliament because some political parties are trying to compress the religious freedom. We will soon have elections next year. That will be the end of my mandate. I am not too optimistic about what will be happening in Italy because I feel that religious freedom will be lessened due to the new elections. I leave here feeling that there are many people we can turn to and consider partners in this fight for religious freedom. I leave here today with a greater courage to fight for religious freedom because I see many people here who share the same feeling despite their religious affiliation. Thank you.
I have been involved with the center and attending these conferences only a few years. But each time that I have come, I have taken away a new bit of information. But what I'd like to share with you today are more impressionistic and thoughts that have come to me as I have sat through the sessions. First of all, I have found the plenary sessions and the breakout sessions to be intellectually stimulating, the presentations challenging, and that have cost me a lot to think a lot about what do I think about this and what do I feel about it, and more importantly, what am I going to do about that? I've been grateful for the opportunity to connect with old friends and to make new friends with whom I hope our friendships will deepen over the next opportunities over the next few years to work together. And I've been struck with the realization of how many people from across the world, from the worlds of the academy, from the worlds of policy and politics, from the churches, the various institutions, educational institutions, how many people are committed to the notion of religious freedom and have a desire and a commitment to it, and how there are so many more things that unite us than separate us, and how working together, identifying those points of commonality and of strength, we can yield and give each other strength, and we can work together to make a more humane world. I'm just deeply grateful for the ways in which so many of you over the last couple of days have touched my heart And I look forward to working with you in the future. And I am grateful for that and for this opportunity. Thank you.
I told Elizabeth that I would speak in English, but allow me to speak Spanish, please. It's okay? Okay. Creo que
I think
el aporte
that the contribution that the Center of Law and Religion of BYU
fundamental en lo académico
is fundamental in the academic, but above all, in all that is regarding to the knowledge and friendship that is generated between people. And certainly we have learned things. I have learned things that I have listened to presentations that are very good. Just the one that we heard right now from Brett has been magnificent about a basic topic and simple, but in a very notable situation. And I think that that I can highlight from this symposium more than the intellectual knowledge that at the end we can find that in the books is the knowledge of the people. Because here in these days, and we have not only met, but also received ideas, but also we have perceived and known feelings. We have known the life experience from many people, and I think that this is very extremely valuable. And I think that an encounter like this is useful to take conscience of the diversity. And we just need to look at our own faces and how we are dressed to understand that, but not only the external diversity, but also the diversity of experiences, the accents that we all have from their own culture, tradition, and own religion. And this has also been very valuable. And I would like to express some words from Latin America. I want to take advantage of this opportunity to do that, because those of us who take care of those topics of law and religion in Latin America, which were not very many, we have a great debt of gratitude to the BYU Center, Cole and Brett and all the team, because in this symposium they have allowed us to keep meeting and adding people who are interested in the defense of the religious freedom and the work and the field of law and religion. We have had more than this symposium a support and a friendship that is very valuable. And this year is ratified. And that's why I wanted to take advantage of this moment to express that. And in the associations, parallel associations that I had to attend, that they have given us also the opportunity to speak in Spanish and in Portuguese and express ourselves with that sense of comfort. And we have learned things and important and different senses, for example, of the experience and the legislative sense with Peru, with those two presenters. And we had the privilege to have one of the authors of one of the recent norms in Peru exposing and sharing with us. We have been able to listen to the experience of Colombia. And we were there in the morning in these sessions with things that are more relevant of the things that are happening in Latin America. In Latin America, it's a peace process. It's a civil war as well. And in this, the religion is not external to this. And we have been seeing how it can be involved in this peace process that is of importance to all of the Latin American people. We have heard several positions that are complementary of the Brazil reality, critical in some situations, exposing challenges that are, and the majorities who are, or minorities who are vulnerable to the situations and the history of countries like the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And there are neighbors and still very different. And we are so related to each other. And we have reflected upon general topics of this colloquial situation and the challenges about religion and the changing world. We have enriched ourselves, and I just want to repeat the gratitude to the Center for this extraordinary symposium. And in this place that is so beautiful and wonderful, so welcoming, in these beautiful countries that we have been able to enjoy as well. And I think that we are all with our hearts overflowing with gratitude and very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
In the UK, many years of experience working in Muslim-Jewish relations, issues to do with anti-Muslim hatred, etc., have taught me that in the UK, the greatest pressures faced by religious people are not between religions, conflict between Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, etc., but rather the great dividing line now in the UK is between those who have any kind of religious faith and those who have none. And those who have no religious faith have great difficulty understanding what religion means to people, and therefore they have great difficulty understanding religious freedom. Coming here to this symposium has made me realize that that is not just a UK phenomenon, it is worldwide. And worldwide, all religions face enormous pressures and threats from those who simply don't understand that man can have a responsibility to God. I've been to Brigham Young University's London Centre on 2 occasions, but this is the first time that I've seen BYU's main campus here in Provo. A university has 2 fundamental obligations. One of them is to teach students, and the other one is to advance human knowledge for the betterment of mankind. Seeing the students and talking to them tells me that BYU is doing an outstanding job at teaching not just educational knowledge, but also the moral values. And this symposium, my awareness of your publishing program, the efforts that you put into it, are an outstanding example of advancing human knowledge, and I'm deeply grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's my great honor and privilege to be invited to this symposium. Maybe I'm the youngest delegate to attend the symposiums. It takes me 29 hours to fly from Hanoi to BYU, but I think it's very worthy. And I think that's at the very first time I came to the airport, it's very warm to be received by a staff from the BYU. And I think that's as many other speakers already mentioned, the Center for International Law and Religion Study have organized the event very professional and very well organized. And we highly appreciate for the hospitality and warm welcomes. And I think that the weather and the sceneries in Utah in general and in Salt Lake and in Provo in general was very kind and generous to us with a very sunny and warm weather. We thank you very much for that. And I think that during the last 4 days, we have learned so much. Not only we learn from the academic, we learn from the speaker, from the panelists who are sitting on this table, but we will also learn from the staff of the BYU, learn from the volunteer peoples, and we learn from the student of the BYUs. On the way from our hotel to the BYU, we make full use of the time to talk with the driver, who can be a staff or a student from BYU, and we can learn a lot from them. Not only learn from the highly respected people who are sitting here. So I think that we have a lot of things to bring home. Our luggage have been very heavy now. It's not as empty when we come here. So especially when we came here, we understand more about the rule of law and the relationship between the rule of law and the freedom to religion. And in Vietnam, we have a new constitution, the 2013 constitution, with a whole new chapter on human rights. And last year, November last year, the National Assembly approved a new law on religion and belief with a chapter on the right of the people, of the citizen to religion and belief. So we have something very, very basic, very fundamental for the freedom of religion in Vietnam. However, by attending the event, we understand that the way to full freedom of religion and religious is still very far away. And it's a tough way, it's not an easy way. But with the knowledge and the encouragement, we will be strong and we will be determined, and we will come to the end of the road. So I think that's by attending the event, we also learn more about the Mormon, the Church of the Latter Saint. I think that you have so many values that we can learn from you. From a country with tea is a daily drinks. How can we imagine that the people who are here, who never drink coffee and tea, who don't drink who don't drink alcohol and tobacco? So it's something for us to think. Why the people here, they never drink tea and coffee? So this is also a good lesson for us. So as I mentioned before, that we not only learn the academic knowledge, but we learn the way you live your life. And we would like to thank to the people like Judge Wallace here. My age is less than half of the age of Judge Wallace here, but I think that he's so enthusiastic, he's so generous. This morning after the breakout session, he had spent about 1 hour meeting the Vietnamese delegation to talk about judicial reform and rule of law in Vietnam. So we highly appreciate the generosity for us you have helped us during the last 15 years, 20 years. So we would like to take the opportunity to thank you all. And we would like to request you to continue to extend the help for us, for Vietnam, so that Vietnam can be better in the future. And we highly appreciate the opportunity that the BYU, the Center for Law, Dr. Durham, Dr. Brett Scharffs have extended to Vietnam delegation. And for myself, thank you very much. And we would like to wish you all healthy, happy, and success. Thank you very much.
Well, it's really, it's always hard at the end of these events to know what to say, because so much has been said, and we've learned so much from other people. You learn in many ways, and I think one of the things this year with the theme religion in a changing world, I'm very conscious of a lot of the changes that seem to be going in the wrong directions, certainly in our own country and other countries. None of our countries are perfect, far from it. We have many things to do, and we're really engaged in a common venture. I think back to the opening sessions of this conference, the triumvirate of words that Jan Fiegel suggested: ignorance, indifference, and fear. Those are things that we really do have to fight, and I think on all of those fronts, a meeting like this makes a difference. We do learn a lot from each other. I think we gather real heightened concern, so that we get I don't think many of us here are indifferent to these issues, but we're given some additional thoughts about why this is so important. And there is something about having others that we realize we're engaged in a kind of struggle together, that reinforces courage and so on. I'm grateful for a number of people here. I can't really name many. There are people who have been major models in my life. I think of Andras Shayo, who I've known since '91. People who I've watched sort of carrying and helping to carry the transformation of Eastern Europe. I think of Ture Lindholm, with whom we have done many countless hours in generating some publications on religious freedom issues, but also working and getting to know and working with other people, seeing the kinds of things that so many of you do, and the privilege of just being able to be associated in some way. I was particularly happy to have Andras Shayo talking here about, I remember 2 or 3 years ago when I first heard him do a lecture on the tragedy of liberty, which is in a way what he was talking about at the opening session. The reality that there are so many forces in our world that are chipping away at something that in some ways we all care about deeply, but this doesn't always translate into political passion. I've always thought in this regard of the story of Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor, the inquisitor who comes back and Jesus returns, and the inquisitor promptly puts him in jail. And then they have some discussions. This is, of course, one of the great classic pieces of Russian literature, of world literature. And the inquisitor, in effect, says, the people don't want freedom. They don't want the burden of freedom that you bought for us. They want food and bread. And now this is a little oversimplified, and it's helpful to have the much more sophisticated picture of how this looks in our world. But I think this is a concern. I think in deep ways, very deep ways, we are all beings who care about freedom and the ability to make choices, but this gets sort of pushed to the back by a lot of other things. I think that we've had a lot of really wonderful insights about what is being done in different countries, what is being done at the level of the world's institutions, in Europe, elsewhere. I've had a lot of discussions, both in listening in sessions, but also talking with people on the sides. Very helpful suggestions of people who know how to do things and to make a difference, people who are making a difference. I think that all of us have a kind of instinctive response to the transcendent in some form, the voice of conference, the experience of awe. It takes different forms in different religious traditions, in non-religious traditions. But I think that response is really fundamental and needs to be protected. And unfortunately, it can easily be snuffed out. It can be corrupted. It opens what is highest in human nature, but also sometimes what is lowest. And it's one of the things that we really need to be concerned about. And we help each other to understand that process more effectively when we're together. A lot of things have been weighing on my mind. I've really been troubled by the dissolution of the Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia. We haven't seen the sort of a national attack on a religious denomination for a long, well, we've seen genocides. I don't want to say we haven't seen it, but we haven't seen this in a place that really has an established legal tradition, that has made commitments to human rights, and particularly to see a group that many of us think of as a group that has been at the forefront of hammering out rights, certainly in our country, in the US tradition. The fundamental free exercise cases are Jehovah's Witness cases, and that's true in a lot of other countries. And so to see sort of the process by which a state in a kind of a very, I mean, it really looks like, I'm not sure it's totally orchestrated, but seems to be a lot orchestrated, by where literature is first found to be extreme, and then people are punished for distributing this extreme literature. It's like what, it's the basic literature of the Jehovah's Witnesses, their Bible, their things would be the equivalent of the Mormon ensign or Liahona. Surprise, they're distributing these things. It's the core of their religion. And then local organizations are dissolved. And then you get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, well, look, there are all these pieces of literature that were extreme, and that's against our law. And then there's these other groups, with other courts have found that they're extreme, and so we've shut them down. And so then you shut down the central organization and the entire denomination. How is it possible that that's happening? And how do we address it? That's what we were talking about in the Italian Parliament a week ago. This is really surprising and deeply distressing. But of course, there are a lot of problems. I don't think there are cases of Jehovah's Witnesses that have been killed, but we know what's going on with ISIS. I was in a conference about a year ago now with the heads of some of the Yazidis, and they had just documented century after century of persecution against them and genocide. And you wonder, how is this possible? Aren't we too late in the world for this kind of thing to be happening? And there are other kinds of things. Now, I see Elder Neuenschwander at the back, who's been a longtime friend. I remember in the summer of '97 when the Russians were passing their current law, which at the time looked terrible, but now looks pretty good. And this is sort of a reaction from within our religious tradition here. But I remember going to a wedding reception one night, and Elder Oakes, who used to be the president of the university here and is now one of the senior apostles in our church, and he said, "How are things going?" And I said, "It's looking pretty grim." And he said, "Be of good cheer. The Lord has overcome the world." Now, I got some real perspective of on this a few years later, because I was in Russia, and we were having I was actually in the home of Elder Neuenschwander, who's been the area president responsible for Russia for our church twice. And there was a discussion going on, and things were looking even worse. And I told this story. And he said, "Yes, he's told me that story too. It's just that I know how much the Lord has to overcome." So there are both sides of this story. Be of good cheer, but it's not necessarily going to be easy. We do have the sense, though, that we should roll up our sleeves and do what we can. I have a deep sense that preserving religious freedom, preserving human rights in general, depends on people standing with competence, that's the opposite of ignorance, with concern, opposite of indifference, and with courage, the opposite of fear. And I've had the deep sense for a long time that by bringing people like you together and having the opportunity to meet and get to know people like you, that this builds networks of people who can stand together in important places in their countries and make a difference. And it will not always be easy, but it is truly standing for something that is just. We will have different interpretations. We will disagree at the margins, but at the core, these are fundamental things. I'll tell you just one other story. I remember many years ago, it was in the early 90s, and we were doing a conference in Romania, and we lined up a meeting with a Senate committee at the end of the day. And this committee had been meeting all day, and this was, we call this sort of the super committee, because this was, Romania was trying to get into the EU, and this committee was authorized to do anything necessary to get into the EU. They could sort of override any other legislation. So this was an important committee. And we met them at the end of the long day. I expected we'd get about 15 minutes. Courtesy visit, hello, goodbye. And I was leading the delegation, and so I started talking about the importance of religious freedom, and you could see all these people, they'd been tired, their eyes were going closed, and what you knew what they were thinking in their mind was American irrelevant. I felt a little badly, but just then, Silvio Ferrari, Italian, spoke up and said, no, this is really serious and this is really critical for getting into the EU, and they paid attention. Well, one of the things that is really important is being able to reinforce each other on some fundamental things. We'll have different structures in our countries, we have different histories, we have different problems that we have to solve. But there are some fundamental core things that we're in together. And times like this, a tremendous privilege of working with you, with others, and doing what we can to be of good cheer and do what little we can to overcome sort of the dark side of the changing world and make it change in better ways. Thank you so much for all you're doing.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Durham. Thank you to each of our 6 representatives for their reflections on the conference. We have dinner this evening for delegates. It's right at the hotel, so it's very easy. Dinner will begin at 7 p.m. And then we have 4 delegates, an excursion tomorrow with some sightseeing and a lunch. And then we will bid you adieu after that lunch. But for now, let me declare closed the business portion of our symposium and ask you to join me in thanking each other and all those who've worked so hard to make it possible.